Welcome, dear friend, to Sleep Documentary TV. I'm so glad you're here. The day is done. Its tasks are complete. And now, it is your time. Time to let go of all that has been and all that is yet to be. Find a place of comfort, a place where you feel safe. Let's take a moment together, just to settle in. Take a slow, deep breath in, feeling the cool air enter, filling your lungs with peace and stillness. And now, a long, slow breath out, releasing the day, letting any lingering thoughts or worries drift away like clouds on a summer sky. Breathe in and feel the quiet of this present moment. Breathe out and let go. Allow my voice to be your gentle guide as we prepare to travel. We are leaving the familiar world behind. Let your mind drift back through the years, past the glow of screens and the hum of modern cities. We travel further, to a time when the American West was still a place of profound wildness, a vast canvas of desert and stone. Our journey takes us to the early 1900s. Here, in the heart of the great southwestern desert, life is governed by two powerful forces, the searing, endless sun, and the wild, unpredictable spirit of a mighty river, the Colorado. For centuries, this river has been the lifeblood of this arid land, carving canyons of breathtaking beauty, a ribbon of turquoise and jade flowing through a world of ochre and rust. But this river has a dual nature. It is both creator and destroyer. For most of the year, it flows with a deceptive calm. But in the spring, when the snows of the distant Rocky Mountains begin to melt, the Colorado awakens. It transforms into a raging, muddy torrent, a destructive giant that surges through the canyons, tearing at the earth, flooding farms, and washing away the fragile hopes of those who try to live by its banks. It is a river of extremes, of feast and of famine. One season brings devastating floods that create inland seas where there was once farmland. The next brings drought, leaving the soil cracked and thirsty under the relentless sun. The people who live here, in small towns and on remote ranches, understand this rhythm. They respect the river's power, they fear its wrath, and they dream of a day when its wild heart might be tamed, not broken. They dream of a way to calm the giant, to store its immense energy from the wet seasons to nourish the land during the dry. It is in this world that we find our human anchor, a young man we will call Arthur. Arthur is not a native of this sun-scorched land. He comes from a place of rolling green hills and gentle rains, but he is a man with a quiet, observant soul and a mind that sees the world in lines, angles, and immense possibilities. He is an engineer, working for the government's Reclamation Service, an agency tasked with the monumental challenge of bringing water to the arid West. Arthur is a man of patient contemplation. He doesn't have the boisterous confidence of a politician or the dramatic flair of a showman. His brilliance is a quiet, steady flame. You might see him sitting on a canyon rim for hours, not speaking, simply watching the river below. He watches the way the water eddies and swirls around a boulder, the way it carves a new channel in the soft sandstone, the immense, raw power contained in its relentless flow. Others see a destructive force, a problem to be conquered. Nay, but Arthur, in his quiet way, sees something different. He sees a sleeping giant, a magnificent and powerful being whose strength, if understood and respected, could be harnessed to bring life to millions. His colleagues are practical men. They talk of small-scale irrigation projects, of canals and levees, efforts to chip away at the edges of the river's might. Arthur listens politely in their meetings, but his mind is elsewhere. He is captivated by a vision on an entirely different scale, a vision so immense it seemed impossible, almost sacrilegious to even consider. He has read the early geological surveys of the region, the reports of men like John Wesley Powell, who first charted this wild river. He has studied the topography, the rock formations, and the flow rates. And in his mind, an idea, vast and audacious, is beginning to take shape. But a great idea, a world-changing idea, doesn't arrive fully formed. It begins with a spark, a small, personal moment that lodges in the heart and refuses to let go. For Arthur, that spark comes not in a grand hall of science or a government office, but on a dusty porch on a sweltering summer evening. He is staying with a family of farmers in a valley downstream. They are good, hard-working people whose lives are a constant gamble against the river. That year, the spring floods were particularly brutal, washing away half their crops. Now, in the punishing heat of late summer, the river has dwindled to a sluggish trickle, and their remaining fields are withering. One evening, Arthur sits on the porch with a farmer, a man named Silas, whose face is a roadmap of sun and worry. Silas's young daughter, a girl of about 7 with bright, curious eyes, comes out to join them. She is carrying a small, withered toy, a little wooden boat that her father carved for her. She holds it out to Arthur. "It can't sail anymore," she says, her voice filled with a child's simple, profound sadness. "The river is too tired." Arthur takes the little boat in his hands. He looks at its crudely carved hull, then looks out at the dusty, cracked earth of the fields. He sees the worry in Silas's eyes, the quiet desperation of a man who works from sunup to sundown only to be at the mercy of a force he cannot control. And he looks at the little girl's face, her disappointment over her tiny, stranded boat mirroring the much larger struggle of her family and everyone else in this valley. In that moment, the problem ceases to be an abstract engineering challenge. It becomes human. It is about a little girl's toy boat. It is about a father's worry. It is about the dream of a stable life in a beautiful but unforgiving land. The river is not just a collection of data points and flow rates anymore. It is the force that decides whether a little girl can play, whether a family can eat, whether a community can survive. He imagines a different world for this family. He pictures a massive wall of concrete, nestled in the narrow, sheer-sided gorge of Black Canyon, a place he has studied on his maps. A structure so immense it could hold back the entirety of the spring melt, gathering the river's fury into a vast, calm lake. This lake, a great, placid reservoir, would be like a giant savings bank for water. In his mind's eye, he sees the little girl's boat floating serenely on the surface of this new, man-made sea. He sees the water released from the base of this great wall, not in a destructive torrent, but in a steady, reliable flow, channeled through canals to Silas's fields, turning the parched brown earth into a vibrant, fertile green. He sees the immense pressure of the stored water turning giant turbines, creating a clean, powerful energy that could light up homes and power cities hundreds of miles away. The vision is so clear, oh, so powerful, it takes his breath away. It is no longer just an idea, it is a calling. He sees it not as a conquest of nature, but as a partnership. It is about calming the sleeping giant, soothing its violent dreams, and asking it to share its immense strength for the good of all. That night, long after the farmhouse has fallen silent, Arthur stays on the porch. The desert sky is a breathtaking canopy of stars, so clear and bright they seem close enough to touch. The air is cool and still. He takes out his worn leather notebook and a pencil, and by the soft, flickering light of a single lantern, he begins to sketch. He doesn't draw a cold, technical blueprint. He draws a vision. He draws the curve of the Great Wall, nestled between the ancient cliffs. He draws the calm, deep blue of the water behind it. He sketches the path of the life-giving canals reaching out into the desert, like veins carrying blood to a thirsty heart. And in the corner of the page, almost as an afterthought, he draws a tiny, simple boat, floating peacefully on a tranquil surface. This is the spark, the human anchor, the quiet, deeply personal moment where a monumental feat of engineering becomes a soulful quest. The journey will be long and arduous. It will take years of struggle, of doubt, of convincing those who say it is impossible. But for Arthur, sitting on that dusty porch under a blanket of stars, the path is clear. He has seen the sleeping giant not as an enemy, but as a partner. And in his heart, he has made a promise to a little girl with a wooden boat that one day, the river will be a friend, and her boat will always have a place to sail. The dream has begun. And so, the seed of the great dam was planted. Not in the halls of power, not in a laboratory, but in a quiet moment of human connection. Arthur carried the image of the little girl in her wooden boat with him, a constant, gentle reminder of the true purpose of his dream. The idea now lived within him, a silent, growing obsession that would consume his days and fill his nights. The world, however, was not yet ready for such a colossal vision. We are in the 1920s, a time of bold ideas, but even then, the scale of what Arthur proposed was staggering. When he returned to his office at the Reclamation Service, his notebooks filled with calculations and sketches, he was met not with applause, but with a quiet, pervasive skepticism. His colleagues, practical men of slide rules and established formulas, would look at his drawings with furrowed brows. Arthur, one might say, his voice kind but firm, the sheer volume of concrete you're proposing, although it's never been done. A structure that high that the weight would crush its own foundation. Another would point to the logistics. And how would you even get the materials there? It's the middle of nowhere. There are no roads, no railways, nothing. They called the project Davis's Folly, after Arthur's full name, Arthur Powell Davis. The name was spoken not with malice, but with a sense of weary resignation, the way one speaks of a brilliant friend who has become lost in an impossible fantasy. They saw an untamable river and an impossible canyon. Arthur saw a foundation of solid bedrock and the perfect, narrow passage to hold back a flood. They saw insurmountable problems. He saw engineering challenges waiting for solutions. These were the years of quiet struggle, the long, patient process of turning a dream into a plausible reality. Arthur's life became a meditation on a single idea. He would spend his days performing his required duties, surveying smaller river projects, his mind only half present. But his nights belonged to the great dam. Picture him in his small, Spartan room, the walls covered with topographical maps of the Colorado River basin. The air is still and warm. The only sound is the gentle hiss of a gas lamp and the soft scratch of his pencil on paper. He works for hours, his brow furrowed in concentration, filling page after page of his notebooks with elegant, looping equations. He is calculating hydrostatic pressure, stress loads, the thermal properties of curing concrete. The sheer scale of the project meant that many of the techniques required simply did not exist yet. He was venturing into the unknown, pushing the very boundaries of engineering. One of the most daunting challenges was the concrete itself. A dam of this size would require more concrete than had ever been used in a single project in human history. The chemical reaction that causes concrete to harden, called hydration, produces a tremendous amount of heat. Arthur's calculations showed that if the dam were built as a single, continuous pour, it would take over a century for the massive structure to cool, and the internal stresses caused by the heat would crack it into pieces before it ever set. This problem haunted him for months, too. He would stare at his figures late into the night, searching for a solution. He studied ancient Roman structures, marveling at their longevity. He read obscure engineering journals from Europe. The answer, when it came, was not a sudden flash of insight, but a slow, dawning realization, a testament to his patient persistence. The solution was to build the dam not as one solid block, but as a series of interconnected, colossal columns. Imagine a giant, vertical puzzle of immense concrete bricks. He sketched it out, a honeycomb of individual blocks, poured one by one. And within each block, he designed a network of thin steel pipes. Cool river water could be circulated through these pipes, like a giant refrigeration system, drawing the heat out of the concrete as cured. It was a revolutionary idea, a symphony of logistics and thermodynamics that would allow the dam to cool in a matter of years, not centuries. This was one of the first quiet breakthroughs, a moment of deep, personal satisfaction that solidified his belief that the impossible was, in fact, possible. But technical challenges were only half the battle. There was the human and political landscape to navigate. The Colorado River flowed through 7 different states, and each had its own claim to the water. The states of the upper basin, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico, worried that the powerful lower basin states, Arizona, Nevada, and California, would use the dam to claim the lion's share of the water, leaving them with nothing. Years were spent in contentious negotiations. Arthur was not a politician, But his quiet, unwavering belief in the project, backed by his meticulous research, provided the steady foundation upon which the politicians could build their agreements. A statesman named Herbert Hoover, then the Secretary of Commerce, stepped in to mediate. He saw the profound logic in Arthur's vision. He understood that taming the river would benefit everyone. After countless meetings, a historic agreement was finally reached, the Colorado River Compact of 1922. It was a landmark piece of diplomacy, dividing the river's water between the upper and lower basins, and it was the crucial political key that unlocked the door to the dam's future. With the political hurdles clearing, Arthur and his team at the Bureau of Reclamation could finally present their official report. The Fall Davis Report, as it was known, was a sober, technical document, but within its pages lay the blueprint for reshaping the American West. They had formally identified the best location, not in Boulder Canyon as originally thought, but in the narrower, more geologically stable Black Canyon. The name, however, stuck for a time, and the endeavor would be known as the Boulder Canyon Project. Now the dream had a name, it had a location, it had a political framework, but it still needed funding and the approval of the United States Congress. This began another long, arduous chapter of the journey. The bill to authorize the project was introduced, but it was defeated, time and time again. Skeptics in Washington called it a boondoggle, a fantasy that would bankrupt the nation. During these years of waiting and debate, Arthur never lost faith. He continued to refine the plans, working with a growing team of dedicated engineers. One of them was a young, sharp-minded man named Walker Young. Walker shared Arthur's quiet determination. He led survey crews into the harsh, unforgiving environment of Black Canyon, dangling from ropes to take rock samples, braving the scorching heat and the turbulent river to create the most detailed geological maps of the site ever made. His team's meticulous work confirmed that the rock walls of the canyon were strong enough to support the immense pressure of the arch dam Arthur had envisioned. Each core sample, each seismic reading, was another small piece of the puzzle falling into place, another quiet victory for the dream. The design itself began to evolve, becoming more than just a feat of engineering. The Bureau of Reclamation's initial sketches were purely functional, adorned with classical, Gothic-inspired flourishes that fell out of place on such a modern marvel. But a Los Angeles architect named Gordon Kaufman was brought in to consult. Kaufman had a vision for the dam that was as bold and modern as the engineering behind it. He saw the immense, curving face of the dam as a canvas for a new kind of beauty. Kaufman stripped away the unnecessary ornamentation, embracing the clean, powerful lines of the structure itself. His designs were sleek and streamlined, in the emerging Art Deco style. He envisioned smooth, unadorned concrete surfaces that would emphasize the dam's monolithic power. He designed elegant intake towers that would rise from the water like futuristic sculptures. He transformed what could have been a purely utilitarian structure into a work of art, a monument that would celebrate not just the taming of a river, but the dawn of a new technological age. And so, through these long years, the dream was slowly, patiently, meticulously chiseled into reality on paper, It was a decade of quiet perseverance, a decade of late nights under gas lamps, of dusty expeditions into the canyon, of heated debates in political chambers, and of the slow, steady refinement of a beautiful, impossible idea. Arthur, now older, his hair flecked with grey, watched as all the pieces came together. His initial spark, that simple moment on a farmer's porch, had been nurtured through years of doubt and difficulty. It had been tested by science, shaped by politics, and elevated by art. Finally, in 1928, the tide turned. The Swing-Johnson Bill, authorizing the Boulder Canyon Project, was passed by Congress and signed into law. The news was met not with a great fanfare, but with a deep, collective sigh of relief from the small band of dreamers who had held the vision for so long. The idea on paper was at last ready to be forged in steel and stone. The years of quiet struggle were over. The obsession that began with a sketch in a worn notebook was about to become the largest construction project the world had ever seen. The sleeping giant of the Colorado River, unaware, continued to flow as it had for millennia. But its time of wild, untamed dreaming was coming to an end. The men who had learned to understand its heart were coming, not to conquer it, but to ask it to join them in building the future. The dream, so long confined to the quiet spaces of paper and mind, was now ready to be born into the world of rock and sun. But a dream of this magnitude could not be built by one man alone. It required an army, and it required a general, a field commander who understood not just the theory of dam building, but the raw, visceral reality of it. That man was Frank Crowe. Frank Crowe was, in many ways, the opposite of the contemplative Arthur Davis. Where Arthur was the quiet visionary, Crowe was the restless pragmatist, a man who lived and breathed the grit and sweat of construction. He was known as a man's man, tough and demanding, but fair. He had spent his life in the river bottoms of the West, building smaller dams, and his one great, driving ambition was to be the man who built the biggest dam of them all. "I was wild to build this dam," he would later say, and that wildness was exactly what was needed. In 1931, the contract to build the dam was awarded to a consortium of construction firms called 6 companies. And they, in turn, handed the immense responsibility of overseeing the entire operation to Frank Crowe. The first challenge was the staggering isolation of Black Canyon. This wasn't a city park, it was one of the most remote and inhospitable places in the country. To build a dam here, they first had to build a world. During the Great Depression, word of the project spread like wildfire, and a great migration began. Tens of thousands of the hopeful, unemployed workers and their families descended upon southern Nevada, desperate for a chance to work. They came in dusty, sputtering automobiles, on freight trains, some even on foot, chasing the promise of a steady paycheck in a time of profound uncertainty. At first, they lived in squalid, makeshift camps along the river, places with names like Ragtown, where families sheltered from the brutal 120-degree summer heat in tents made of canvas scraps and cardboard. It was a harsh and desperate beginning. But soon, a new, planned city began to rise from the desert dust, Boulder City, federal government designed and built this town to house an army of workers. But oh, it was an oasis of order in the wilderness, with small cottages for families, the old dormitories for single men, and massive mess halls that served thousands of meals a day. A community, forged by a common purpose, began to take root in the middle of the Mojave Desert. With the workforce gathered, the great symphony of creation could begin. And the first movement of this symphony was a deafening roar. Before the foundation of the dam could be laid, the mighty Colorado River itself had to be moved. To do this, Frank Crowe orchestrated an incredible feat. Teams of men, known as hard rock miners, began drilling into the solid rock walls of the canyon. Their task was to blast 4 enormous diversion tunnels, each 50 feet in diameter, 2 through the Nevada wall and 2 through the Arizona wall. The work was grueling and dangerous. They worked in 3 shifts, around the clock, in the choking dust and carbon monoxide-filled air of the tunnels. They invented a massive drilling rig called the Jumbo Rig, a truck-mounted frame that could hold 30 drills at once, allowing them to attack the rock face with relentless efficiency. Day and night, the canyon echoed with the rhythmic chattering of the drills, a sound punctuated by the deep, earth-shaking boom of dynamite blasts. Then, in November of 1932, the moment came. A temporary dam was breached, and the entire flow of the Colorado River was diverted, rerouted through the newly completed tunnels. For the first time in its long history, the river was not flowing through the heart of Black Canyon. The Giant had been gently nudged aside, and a section of the ancient riverbed was now exposed to the sky, a dry, rocky canvas awaiting the first strokes of the masterpiece. With the site dry and protected by massive cofferdams, the next phase began, preparing the foundation. This was a task of subtraction, of clearing away the old to make way for the new. For millennia, the river had deposited silt and gravel, and the canyon walls were weathered and weak on the surface. All of it had to go. This work belonged to the high scalers. These were the most daring men in the canyon, a fearless crew, many of whom were Native Americans. Their job was to rappel down the sheer 800-foot cliffs on rope, armed with jackhammers and dynamite. They dangled in the vast emptiness, like spiders on a thread, chipping and blasting away every loose and unstable piece of rock until they reached the solid, virgin bedrock that would anchor the dam. They wore hardened, tar-dipped hats for protection, the precursors to the modern hard hat. It was breathtakingly dangerous work, a high-wire ballet of courage and precision. Now, the canyon was ready. The foundation was scrubbed clean. The walls were solid. The stage was set for the main event, the pouring of the concrete. This was a part of the process that Frank Crowe had revolutionized. To solve the heat problem that Arthur Davis had identified on paper, Crowe devised an ingenious system of overhead cables, a network of steel wires stretching from rim to rim across the canyon. Giant steel buckets, each capable of holding 8 cubic yards of concrete, could be whisked along these cables and delivered to any point on the dam site with pinpoint accuracy. And so, the great pouring began on June 6, 1933. It was a slow, methodical, and deeply calming ballet of creation. Oh, a concrete mixing plant, the largest in the world, had been built just upstream. It churned out a relentless supply of wet concrete, which was loaded into the giant buckets. Imagine the scene, a sensory journey into the heart of a workshop. The air smells of wet cement or hot oil, and the sharp, clean scent of a desert after rare rain. Oh, the sun gleams on the wet, gray surfaces into the dominant sound is the low, rhythmic rumble of the mixing plant, a constant, steady heartbeat for the entire canyon. You hear the clear, sharp ring of a bell, a signal from the foreman below. High above, the cableway operator engages his levers, and a massive, 4-ton bucket begins its graceful journey out over the chasm. It glides through the air, suspended against the deep blue sky, its shadow passing over the tiny figures of the men working below. It slows, then stops, hovering precisely over one of the designated rectangular forms. Another bell rings. The bucket's jaws open, and a torrent of thick, grey concrete pours into the wooden mold. A slow, deliberate cascade. Men known as puddlers wade into the fresh pour, the tall rubber boots sinking into the viscous mixture. They stomp and prod with long poles, working the concrete into every corner, ensuring there are no air pockets, no imperfections. Their movements are rhythmic and practiced, a slow, synchronous dance. As soon as one block is poured, the intricate network of 1-inch steel pipes is laid within it. Then, cool water from the river is pumped through the pipes, beginning the long, slow process of drawing the heat from the concrete heart of the dam. It was a process repeated thousands upon thousands of times, block by colossal block, layer by patient layer. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 2 solid years, the concrete flowed. It was a symphony of materials. The raw strength of the aggregate, the sand and gravel excavated from an ancient riverbed just upstream, the binding power of the cement, the cool, clear water of the Colorado itself, used both to mix the concrete and then to calm its fire-curing process, and the tensile strength of steel, miles and miles of it, reinforcing the powerhouse and outlet tunnels. Slowly, inexorably, the dam began to rise from the canyon floor. It grew like a strange and beautiful crystalline formation, a monument of human will taking its place among the timeless geology of the canyon. The men who built it felt a deep, unspoken pride. They were not just earning a wage, they were part of something immense, something that would endure long after they were gone. They were calming a giant, and in its place, they were building a new kind of giant, a quiet, steadfast sentinel of concrete and steel. The symphony of creation was reaching its crescendo. For 2 years, the canyon had been filled with the constant, rhythmic pulse of creation. The relentless ballet of swinging buckets and flowing concrete had become the new heartbeat of a desert. The dam grew, block by patient block, rising higher and higher, a pale, curved wedge of astonishing grace and power, nestled between the dark, ancient cliffs. Now, in the early days of 1935, the end of the great construction was in sight. The last block of concrete was poured in May of that year, and a profound, unfamiliar quiet began to settle over Black Canyon. The work was not entirely finished. Intricate machinery was being installed deep within the powerhouse at the dam's base. But the Great Wall itself was complete. It stood as a silent, monolithic testament to an impossible dream made real. All that remained was for it to fulfill its purpose. All that remained was for it to meet the river. The day chosen for the dam to begin its life's work was February 1st, 1935. On this day, the diversion tunnels that had carried the Colorado River safely around the construction site for 2.5 years would be closed. On this day, the river would be stopped, and the great reservoir, which would come to be known as Lake Mead, would begin to form. There was no grand ceremony planned for this moment, no crowd of dignitaries. The dedication by the president would come later in the year. This moment was for the engineers, for the workers, for the men who had poured their sweat and soul into this colossal undertaking. It was a quiet, almost spiritual transition. Frank Rowe, the hurry-up man who had driven the project forward with such relentless energy, was there. His usual gruff demeanor was softened by a sense of profound awe. Arthur Davis and Walker Young, the quiet dreamers who had first envisioned and mapped this monumental work, stood beside him. They were older now, their faces withered by the desert sun, their eyes holding the quiet satisfaction of seeing a lifetime's vision come to fruition. Imagine the morning. The air is cool and crisp, carrying the scent of sage and damp stone. The sun is just beginning to crest the canyon rim, painting the high cliffs in shades of rose and gold. A small group of men gathers near the entrance of one of the diversion tunnels. There is no fanfare, just the low murmur of respectful voices. They have come to witness the birth of their creation. The plan was simple, yet profound. Massive, 35-ton steel gates were designed to be lowered into the diversion tunnels, sealing them off. The gate for one of the Arizona tunnels was the first to be closed. The signal is given. Deep within the mechanics of the dam, a switch is thrown. There is a low groan of machinery coming to life, the sound of immense weight beginning to move. Slowly, ponderously, the giant steel gate begins its descent. It moves at a glacial pace, inch by deliberate inch, down into the channel where the full force of the Colorado River is flowing. The water, which has been coursing freely through the tunnel, meets the descending edge of the gate. For a moment, it seems to resist. It boils and churns, its energy concentrated against this new obstacle. A great, frothing spray erupts as the river fights against this new boundary. The sound is a deep, powerful roar, the voice of the giant protesting its containment. But the gate's descent is inexorable, backed by the unyielding power of machinery and the weight of tons of steel. Lower and lower it sinks. The roar of the water intensifies, and then, as the gate nears the bottom of the channel, the tone begins to change. The violent roar softens into a deep, resonant hum. And then, with a final, shuddering thud that can be felt through the very rock of the canyon. The gate seats itself at the bottom. A sudden, breathtaking silence falls. The constant, rushing sound of the river flowing through the tunnel is gone. For the first time, the men standing at the canyon floor can hear the whisper of the wind, the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. The mighty Colorado River, for the first time in its millions of years of existence, has been stopped. For a long moment, no one speaks. The workers, men who had faced death-defying heights and grueling labor, stand with their hard hats in their hands, their faces etched with a mixture of exhaustion, pride, and pure wonder. They are watching the water begin to rise. Behind the great, curving face of the dam, the river, its path forward now blocked, begins to somewhat swell. It creeps slowly up the pale concrete, the turquoise water a stark and beautiful contrast against the stark white of the wall. It is no longer a raging torrent, but a quiet, spreading pool. The giant is not fighting anymore. It is calming. It is settling. This is the moment of triumph. It is not a loud, explosive event, but a breathtakingly peaceful one. It is the dam taking its first breath, feeling the gentle, insistent pressure of the water for the first time. It is the beginning of a partnership between the wild river and the steadfast wall. A partnership that will last for centuries. Arthur watches, and his eyes are not on the complex machinery or the rising water levels. He is thinking of a dusty porch, of a farmer's worried face, and of a little girl with a wooden boat. The water that is now gathering, this immense store of life and energy, is a fulfillment of the promise he made to her in his heart all those years ago. A quiet smile touches his lips, and a single tear traces a path through the dust on his cheek. His quiet, impossible dream, once nothing more than a whisper of an idea, a sketch by lantern light, is now a physical reality, holding back a river, ready to make the desert bloom. Frank Rowe, the man of action, claps Arthur on the shoulder. Words are unnecessary. They have done it. They have taken the wild, destructive power of the Colorado and respectfully calmed it, harnessing its strength to bring life to the desert. The sleeping giant has closed its eyes, and in its tranquil sleep, it will power the dreams of millions. The great work is done. The dam has been born. As the sun climbs higher, the water continues its slow, steady rise. It is the beginning of Lake Mead, the dawn of a new era for the American West. The men begin to disperse, though their work here finished, returning to their homes in Boulder City with a quiet sense of purpose fulfilled. The canyon is left to the care of its new guardian, the great, silent dam, standing firm as the waters of the new lake gently lap against its base. Like a child patting the hand of a gentle giant. In the quiet aftermath of that momentous day, a new reality began to settle over the desert. The water behind the dam continued its slow, inexorable rise, day after day, week after week. The narrow, winding canyons that had been carved by the river over eons were slowly submerged, their red, rock walls disappearing beneath the expanding surface of a great, tranquil lake. The wild river was being transformed into a vast, placid sea, a shimmering expanse of turquoise and sapphire under the desert sun. The dam itself seemed to settle into its new role with a quiet grace. It was no longer a construction site, filled with the clangor of machinery and the shouts of men. It was now a silent sentinel, a place of immense peace and power. The initial leaks that appeared as the pressure mounted were meticulously sealed, and the structure stood firm, a perfect union of human ingenuity and natural strength. Later that year, on September 30th, 1935, the official dedication ceremony was held. President Franklin D. Roosevelt stood before a crowd of thousands and spoke of a great achievement, a triumph of hope and collective effort in the midst of a Great Depression. It was a moment of national pride, a symbol that even in the darkest of times, humanity could create things of profound beauty and lasting purpose. But the true legacy of the dam was not written in speeches or ceremonies. It was written in the quiet, profound changes that began to ripple across the landscape of the American West. The first generators in the powerhouse began to spin in 1936, their hum a new, steady heartbeat in the canyon. Hydroelectric power, clean and abundant, began to flow through new transmission lines, stretching for hundreds of miles across the barren desert. This energy would fuel the growth of such sleepy desert towns like Las Vegas and power the burgeoning industries of Southern California. It was the energy that would help build the ships and planes for the coming World War, and in the decades that followed, it would light up millions of homes, a quiet, constant gift from the calmed river. And then there was the water. For the first time, the flow of the lower Colorado was steady and predictable. The devastating cycle of flood and drought was broken. Life-giving water, released in precisely measured amounts, flowed into canals like the All-American Canal, reaching deep into the arid valleys of California and Arizona. Land that had been parched and barren for centuries began to transform. The desert, just as Arthur had dreamed, began to bloom. Fields of green alfalfa, groves of citrus trees, and vast vegetable farms flourished, turning the region into one of the most productive agricultural areas in the world. The dam was not just a wall of concrete, it was the heart of a new circulatory system, pumping life into the arid lands. The dam also became a thing of beauty, a destination for travelers from all over the world. The clean, Art Deco lines envisioned by Gordon Kaufman gave it a timeless elegance. And on the Nevada side of the crest, a remarkable monument was installed, the work of a sculptor named Oscar G. Hansen. Two massive, winged bronze figures, which Hansen called the winged figures of the Republic, sat on a polished black base, their gaze turned upward towards the sky. They symbolized the triumph of intellect and physical strength, tribute to the collective genius of the nation that built the dam. Between them, set into the terrazzo floor, was a celestial map, marking the precise alignment of the stars on the night of the dam's dedication. A beautiful, poetic gesture connecting this monumental human achievement to the vast, timeless rhythms of the cosmos. Years pass. The world changes in countless ways. The young engineer, Arthur, is now an old man. We see him one last time, standing on the crest of the dam he first dreamed of so many decades ago. It is a warm, Still evening. The sun is setting, casting a golden glow over the vast expanse of Lake Mead. The water is calm, a perfect mirror reflecting the painted colors of the desert sky. He is no longer an employee of the Bureau of Reclamation, he is just a visitor, another soul drawn to the quiet majesty of this place. He runs his hand over the smooth, solid parapet. He can feel a faint, almost imperceptible vibration deep within the structure, the thrum of the turbines, the steady pulse of the river's captured energy flowing out into the world. He looks down the incredible, curving face of the dam to the powerhouse far below, then out at the serene surface of the lake stretching to the horizon. His mind drifts back to that dusty porch, to the heat of a summer long past. He remembers the worried face of a farmer and the sad eyes of a little girl whose wooden boat could not sail on a tired river. He thinks of her now. She would be a woman, perhaps with children and grandchildren of her own, living in a world transformed by this very structure. A world where the lights turn on with a flick of a switch, where fresh food from the desert fills the markets, and where the river is a dependable friend rather than a feared enemy. He hopes she has a good life. He hopes she has had many boats, and that they have always had calm, peaceful waters to sail upon. A gentle smile graces his features. The initial spark, that simple, human moment of empathy, had ignited a fire of creation that had reshaped a continent and bettered the lives of millions. The journey was long, the struggle immense, but standing here, in the peaceful twilight, he knows it was all worth it. The sleeping giant had been calm, not with force, but with understanding and respect. And in its peaceful slumber, it had shared its powerful dreams with the world. And so, our story comes to a peaceful close. The story of a wild river and the quiet dreamers who learned to speak its language. It is a reminder that the greatest creations often begin with the smallest spark of kindness, and that the most enduring strength is the strength that is gentle. Now, it is time for your own dreams. Let the story of this great dam be a soothing presence as you drift deeper and deeper into restful sleep. May your own dreams be as vast and peaceful as the great lake behind the dam, and may you awaken refreshed, restored, and ready for a new day. Thank you for joining us on Sleep Documentary TV. Sleep well, dear friend. May your night be filled with the deepest peace.